So Ashley Madison CEO Noel Bitterman told the newspaper that strong, risk-taking personalities who do well in politics are simply more likely to stray from their spouse. So, James, on some level, this can seem just like another, oh, stuff got hacked and people might be embarrassed. But I think we're getting to the heart of what sets this apart from other so-called hacking stories, James.
Well, that's right. And the word of the day, I guess, for this is schadenfreude. Of course, people are going to take a look at these Congress critters and parliament pests and other politicians in all of these capitals, including, of course, Ottawa, getting busted in a hack like this and think, well, it couldn't have happened to a more deserving bunch of people, especially because it was clearly their own actions that ultimately, led to this. But I think we have to be careful about the lynching that can take place here. Of course, no one's going to stand up for a bunch of cheaters like this, but the point of this is that this really is a sign, a taste of what can happen when these types of websites, and not just these types of websites, but really any website that collects any of your personal information and or credit card data or whatever, gets hacked and released to the public in a big way like this. And there's a couple of stories that at least broach this idea. One from Washington Post talking about don't gloat about the Ashley Madison leak. It's about way more than infidelity, talking about the nature of internet privacy and what this means, and citing an interesting little story that was written about what if the entire internet and everything was hacked and everyone's entire internet history was released. It would be the end of the internet as we know it, basically, because there's all sorts of things that people are doing online that they don't want everyone and their neighbors and everyone to know about. So I think we have to be mindful of that. And one other type of repercussion that can happen from this, there's a Slate.com article from 2003, What Happens to Cheating Soldiers, where they note, what sort of punishment do soldiers face for cheating on their spouses? The military penalty remains pretty harsh, up to a year in confinement, plus a dishonorable discharge, which entails the forfeiture of all retirement pay. The article goes on to note that it's extremely unlikely and unusual for that to actually be prosecuted, and difficult for it to do so because of the sort of legal standard that they have to meet in the prosecution of that. So not a lot of soldiers do get prosecuted for that, but it is certainly one of the ramifications that could happen, except, James, I think you have an update on that?
I've already seen the Pentagon gives free pass to Ashley Madison cheaters, saying they're not going to investigate anything, even though you can kind of look, and that Slate article you just mentioned actually goes into Article 134 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, saying that, well, we won't really investigate it, unless it lowers the morale on a base or damages the public's faith in the armed forces. So I guess you could, argue that that'd be like saying I'm disappointed in Obama. It's like, I never had faith in it in the first place, so you didn't really destroy something that wasn't there in the first place. However, this situation seems to fit that to a T, that you have lowered morale and you have damaged the public's faith in not only armed forces, but every department we just listed earlier, James. So
if that's what really took to damage the good reputation, the sterling reputation of the U.S. military. But coming up next on this story, there's $500 million worth of lawsuits that have now been filed against Ashley Madison for this. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out for the ramifications on future such hacks and leaks. And then also a rather dark update, Ashley Madison suicides over website hack. And so now we're starting to see the first batch of people whose lives are ending because of this hack. And again, I mean, I know a lot of people aren't going to be sympathetic to people who are cheating on their spouses and things like that. But eventually this is going to start biting into other areas of people's lives as these hacks become more commonplace.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And we've seen it before, and we'll probably see it again and again. James, our second story this week on episode 238 of New World Next Week, I guess, goes in some way from what we've always kind of talked about as virtual flag terrorism and privacy and piracy to another area of who created what. And we've been discussing ISIS for quite a while now. So let's take one from allgov.com. Congress avoids Obama's call for a resolution of war against ISIS. The U.S. has been at war with ISIS for a year. Or have we always been at war with Eurasia? But there's still been no official authorization for the war. But we can't blame Obama for this one. presidents often dodge asking Congress to sanction U.S. military operations against a foreign enemy, but that's not the case this time. Obama submitted to Capitol Hill a, quote, complex draft resolution that authorizes the president to use force against the Islamic State. This, according to Garrett Epps at The Atlantic. Some repugs in Congress, however, won't touch the authorization, not because it goes too far and could potentially draw the U.S. into a protracted conflict, but because it doesn't go far enough. Obama's request specifies that the use of U.S. ground troops is forbidden, verboten, and it puts a 3-year limit on the authorization. Republican lawmakers would prefer, quote, something far more open-ended and sweeping, Epps wrote. Senator Marco Rubio of Florida wants a simple authorization that tells the White House to defeat and destroy ISIL, period. Another Republican running for president, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, insists Obama's limitations would harm the war effort. James, others in Congress say Obama's proposal goes too far. Actually, one, Tim Kaine, Democrat out of Virginia, pushing for Congress to get a chance to debate this U.S. involvement against ISIS. And he sponsored a bill that would be much more limited. And it's co-sponsored by a Republican, but it has gone nowhere. In a different note, James, CENTCOM, that's Central Command, they were supposed to give a report to the Inspector General, who inspects all these government agencies. The IG says, yeah, we think CENTCOM lied to us. They changed the intelligence that was given to them by the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, so it was reworked by CENTCOM to make the ISIS war sound so much more upbeat. So those are some of the more pretty open, obvious lies about ISIS and the war of terror from the stateside view, James. So what's your take?
Well, it's interesting to get that story about CENTCOM fiddling with the DIA data because, of course, we just had the ex-DIA chief Michael Flynn come out on Al Jazeera and warn that it was a willful decision to fund and train the Syrian Islamists of ISIS. So, yes, I mean, well, welcome to our last year's reporting that this was a creation of the United States government. But yes, now the DIA, Michael Flynn, coming out and admitting it. And so here we have this story that this is supposedly about newer data from the DIA, but obviously I think it applies to the old 2011, 2012 intelligence where the DIA was saying, hey, this is going to create an Islamic State faction. Basically, they were saying this is going to create, the chance for some sort of Islamic extremist state to come into view. So interesting that development's coming on. But of course, all of this is predicated on the lie that ISIS is some sort of independent group that just sprang out of nowhere and took the world by surprise, which of course is a load of poppycock. Please do see who is really behind ISIS, episode 295 of the Corbett Report from last year, where we detailed the various groups that are behind the rise of ISIS, including, of course, Turkey, who has been, I think, more increasingly in the spotlight. And I think it's interesting that some of these stories are coming up. For example, we just had one from McClatchy, Syrian rebels, Turkey tipped Al-Qaeda group to U.S.-trained fighters. So people who don't know about this story, basically there were a bunch of U.S.-trained moderates who entered into Syria to undermine ISIS. And, oh, lo and behold, they were instantly captured. And so it turns out now the latest accusations that basically Turkish intelligence tipped off ISIS that these guys were coming and when and where, and that's how they got nabbed. But Turkey has just come out to officially deny those allegations, so take it for what that's worth. Meanwhile, airstrikes kill 41 Kurdish fighters, Turkish military says. The country has been bombing PKK targets in northern Iraq and in mostly Kurdish southeastern Turkey since July 24th. So, yes, that agreement that was signed for ISIL-free zones a couple of weeks ago between the U.S. and Turkey is, as we reported at the time, just about keeping the Kurds down and keeping the Kurds under bombardment. So, again, there's so many lies going on here. I think really ISIS is just being pushed, and they are trying to genuinely, I think, push this agenda right now to undermine ISIS, because that's the point all along. You put the chess piece in that square of the board, and then you come in and take over that square of the board. So I think it's that's where we're moving into. Obama's trying to get a war resolution. The Republicans want an even more aggressive war resolution. I really think that we're seeing the shape up for some sort of fall invasion.
Well, and it should always be obvious that that's the only real difference between the two phony sides here in the States is how much war each side wants. It's not like one is against it and one is for it. And James, I think it's amazing how quickly sort of the updates come, as we did. We just talked about that 2 weeks ago. Oh, they made that deal with Turkey, and then there you see it, killing Kurdish fighters just within a couple of weeks. So it does floor me sometimes how quickly a lot of these things happen. And just by paying attention week after week, you start to be able to add it up and say, oh, I've seen this. I know how this is going to play out. Our third and final story this week, James, as we typically do and as we have done all throughout 2015, is try and highlight some kind of good news. And this, James, may be one of our not unmitigated good news, but it is good because the truth will out, and we'll take it from the antimedia.org. Independent GMO researchers FOIA'd emails show $25,000 Monsanto grant in January 2015. A FOIA request filed by an Oakland organization called U.S. Right to Know requested email records between academics, scientists, and representatives of big agriculture.